Okay, so we now have a basic understanding of the Premiere Pro UI and how it kind of like works, right? So we understand like where the panels are located, how the workspaces are, what they've got, what panels are. We don't fully understand them, but we kind of know what each of these panels does. Now it's time to start beginning the process of editing. As I told you guys, the main way we're going to be learning in this program is by editing. We're not going to sit here and tell you guys, hey, this effect does this, and hey, this does this. Instead, we're going to be applying it and showing it to you guys, because the best way you can retain information is by visual representation. You got to see it so that and use it so that you can actually retain the information. So that actually brings me to a very important point. If you guys don't have Premiere Pro open in the background right now, even though we're not doing anything, at least tracking what I am saying, then you're probably doing a big mistake. So just make sure you have Premiere Pro open in the background and make sure you are following along every single step. That's the best way you can retain this information. The last thing you want to do is watch through all these courses and forget all this information, okay? So with that being said, in this course, we're going to be diving into sequences and timelines. And you might be wondering, what on earth are sequences? Well, if we want to start editing footage, the best way I can describe this for you is it's kind of like a rule book, which has a bunch of rules or things by which the footage is going to abide to. And what I mean by this is a sequence allows the footage which is under it or inside of it and the editing inside of it to all be rendered and follow a strict amount of rules. And why is this important? It's because when you want to create edits, you don't want a part of it to be rendered in 20 FPS and another in 30 and one in 720p and one in 1080p and one in 144p. Instead, you want all of it to be under the same rules, under the same 1920 by 1080, under the same FPS, under the same render settings and the same everything. So with this being said, that is why sequences are important, and that is why we're going to be learning them in this course and diving into timelines and how they work. So with this being said, let's go ahead and get straight into it. So as I mentioned, a sequence is kind of an overview. The best way I can explain this, it's an overview of these things or factors which your footage is going to abide by. And again, this stuff you don't really learn by me just telling you, you learn more by using. So how do you create a sequence? Well, the first thing every editor does when they first get into Premiere Pro is they have to create a sequence. So we go up to File, we go up to New, and then we go over to Sequence. When I access my files and I click on New, it allows me to create new things. One of the things I'm going to be creating is a sequence, and you're going to get this window here. Now, it's not going to look like this. Is probably going to look like something like that, just all messed up and things. Now, these are all sequences which Premiere Pro has already set for us. Basically, what a sequence means is what are the dimensions of your edit, what is the FPS, and what is the what's the render engine that we're using for this, okay? So these are the three main things that a sequence contains, and that's exactly what we're going to be creating in this video. So what I want you to do is head over to whichever one of these, because we're going to be creating our own sequence and saving it as a preset. So just click on whichever one and go over to settings. When you click on settings, you're going to be able to change the settings of your preset. And the first thing you want to do, change the editing mode to custom. The reason we do this is because if the editing mode is anything else, it's going to set presets like that. It's going to set it to whatever it wants. Instead, if we set it to custom, we are able to change it to whatever we want. The first thing we're going to be editing in is the time base. The time base definitely needs to either be 25 frames per second or 30 FPS. If you come from like a gaming background and you're thinking of editing in 60 FPS, I don't recommend it because it looks less cinematic. The smoother it is, usually the less cinematic it looks. So what you want to do is you want to go for 24 frames, 25 frames, 30 frames. That looks really, really cinematic. So for that reason, I'm going to be setting my sequence to 30 frames per second. Let's talk about the frame size. The dimensions of our sequence, or how our edit is going to be, its dimensions, we don't want them 144p, we don't want them 720p, we want them to be 1080p. Or if you're editing in 4K, you would change this. And 1080p in pixels basically means 1920, so 1920, and 1080 on the vertical, which gives you, oops, for some reason that is messed up. So what's the reason that has done that? Let's see. So 1920 by 1080, which is supposed to give you excuse me, sorry, I'm running into some issues. It's supposed to give you a 16 by 9. There it is, 16 by 9 aspect ratio. Sorry, sometimes, Premiere Pro has to be a bit annoying. So if we set the frame size to 1920 by 1080, it's going to give us a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. So what is this? What do all these numbers mean? Well, the time base is just how many frames are happening per second. So we're going to set this to 30 frames per second. The frame size under the video section The frame size is just how many pixels there are inside of your frame. So just how high quality the image is. And we're going to be using 1920 by 1080 because that is the standard for a horizontal video, 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels. We're going to be setting the pixel aspect ratio to square pixels. Don't even worry about this. Set this to no fields and display format to 30 FPS. Just don't worry about this stuff. There's no need to go into it. Leave the audio as it is. Go down to your video previews, and this is where we gotta get into the nice stuff. So when you get to your video previews, this determines how you're going to be previewing the edit inside of the program window. Remember the program window, which is this window over here that we mentioned we're going to be watching our edit through. So if you set the video format through your preview window to QuickTime, it's actually going to ruin some of the colors and stuff. So let's just make sure that we go over here and set it to, oh sorry, we have to leave it at QuickTime, excuse me. And the codec, we must set this to H.264. So H.264 allows us to see full color range, allows us to see full video resolution. It just is a lot better for your preview. And if you are struggling with your PC and it is like finding it difficult to render, you can always change the preview resolution. So as I mentioned, like this is the video section, this determines your edit. This is the audio section, determines the audio, but the video preview has nothing to do with your edit. It just has to do with how you're previewing the video inside of Premiere Pro, and you can change the resolution for it in here. Let's set maximum bit depth and maximum render quality, and let's quickly go through the settings one more time to recap. Set your editing mode to custom so you can change things. 30 FPS over here, 1920 by 1080 to make sure that you have a full frame. Your pixel aspect ratio and all this cool stuff, just leave that as it is. All this, leave it as it is. This over here, make sure it changes to H.264. Some of you guys might not have H.264, so you could set it to whichever one set applies for you. So you could go for Apple, whatever it is, works for you guys. Some of you guys have MacBooks, so you can also go for that. Now, once you are satisfied with your settings, and I have confirmed, okay, my dimensions are 1920 by 1080, my FPS is 30, and my render or codec is H.264, all is positive, all is good. Let's go ahead and save this as a preset. So I'm going to click on Save Preset, and I'm going to call it YouTube. I'm just going to call it Horizontal 1080p. Okay, and when I call it horizontal 1080p and click on enter, it's going to save it under the custom folder. And now every time I open Premiere Pro and I go to create any sequence, if I go down to my custom, I can find it here, and I never have to worry about sequences again. There we go. We've already created our own first preset. So with this being said, our sequence is now going to contain all of our edits, and our edits are going to follow the 1920 by 1080 dimension, the 30 FPS frame rate, and the H.264 codec, which is all very, very good because it's going to mean our edit's going to be high quality, cinematic, and very, very accurate. So with this being said, the second part of this course is I also want to explain the timeline, which is this thing over here. How exactly does the timeline work? The timeline is kind of like the basis or fundamental of editing. It's almost everything that has to do with editing. Most of your editing is going to be done here. And the timeline is basically made up of a bunch of video layers and a bunch of audio layers separated by this big gray line. And I'm going to be showing you guys how you can use these. But what this whole thing means is the video layers host or hold whatever video you've dragged into them, and the audio layers hold whatever audio layer you've dragged into them. So if I dragged in a video that has both video, something you can watch, and audio sound to it, some parts of it are going to be in the video. So the video part of it, the actual footage, like the image I'm seeing on the screen, that's going to be in the video layer. And the audio part of it, the sound that I'm hearing, is going to be in the audio section of the timeline. And if you guys can see, the video section is the V1, V2, V3, and the audio section is A1, A2, A3, and A4. So this is kind of how your timeline works. You can also add tracks, say, do a bunch of things. Two things you need to know about your timeline is how you should maneuver around it. To make the vertical size bigger, you can use this slider here. And to make the horizontal size bigger or zoom in, you can use this slider here. Up top, you've also got your time. So this is at 00, this is at 0:30, this is at 01, right? So on and so forth. So you can basically use these to see what's the time at with your edit, okay? So yeah, that's kind of everything that there is to the timeline. Let's go ahead and drag in some footage and see what we can basically do with this. So we're going to click on our desktop, or you can click on just videos, and I'm going to drag in basically whichever video pops up in front of me, like this one over here. Obviously, when I drag it in, I have to import it into my project files, and so we drag it into here. And now I'm going to drag this into my timeline and check out what's about to happen. So if I drag this into my timeline, look at that. All of a sudden, this one piece of video, which you can watch, is now split into these two squares. And one of the squares is in V1 and one of the squares is in A1. The reason that is because a video has both image and sound. And for that reason, you can watch something and hear its sound, which means some of it's going to be in V1, which is the video part, and the A1 is going to be the audio. And if I click play or click this button here, I can basically watch through it and hear the audio. Now check this out. I can actually make this video layer invisible. And so if I make V1 invisible, all of a sudden I can't see the video. But guess what? I can still hear the audio because I haven't muted the audio. Now if I make this thing visible and I mute this by clicking on M, all of a sudden everything in A1 can't be heard. Now check this out. If I make this thing invisible and muted, but I move the video to V2, all of a sudden the invisibility doesn't apply on it. So now I can clearly see it. If I move it back to V1, it's again invisible. If I move this audio to A2, I can hear it, so on and so forth. So a timeline is really, really simple, and like Adobe has made it so simple. This kind of idea or this concept works over all the programs, not just editing, 3D modeling, audio, sound design, because it allows you to play through whatever content you've got and visualize it in layers. And these layers work exactly like so. Now you guys are going to be learning how these layers work. There's also one more thing I do need to mention. If I did, for example, drag in an image, where do you think it's going to appear, right? Because an image doesn't have sound, it only has video. Do you think it's going to appear in A1? Probably not. Let's go ahead and check this out. So if I go ahead and drag in a picture of these thumbnails, let's go for one of this one like this. There you go. Notice how it's only pink and only in the video. And if I try to drag it into the audio, there's nothing there, right? It's empty. And if I drag it into just video, it is available. But now if I drag in a song, for example, so let's go over to drag in a random song just to show you guys what this means. So let's say we dragged into this song. You can see it is visible in the audio layer, but as soon as I drag it up, it's invisible. So if I bring these back to my project panel, which they are already in my project panel because we already dragged them in. So let's go ahead and delete these. And let's go ahead and select both of these like this, and we can click on delete to delete them. Don't worry too much about this. I'll just show you how this whole thing works. But if I try to drag music into video, it doesn't work. Only if I drag it into audio. And if I try to drag video into music, it doesn't work. Only in video. We can undo all this by clicking Control Z, by the way. If you ever did something and you want to undo it, you can click on Control Z and keep undoing until you get to the point which you are satisfied with, which is an empty timeline. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly how a timeline works. So now you understand what the Premiere Pro UI is like, how sequences work, and how a timeline works. It's finally time to dive into our next section. So the next part is, I've got my courses over here. The next part is the effect controls. And the reason we're going to be diving into our effect controls before anything else is because I first want you guys to grasp the concept of how our effect controls panel works and how it can change the variables of some footage. So with this being said, now that you understand all of this stuff, make sure you are following along with Premiere Pro in the background. Let's go ahead and move on to our next section, in which we're going to be discussing specifically the effect controls panel and what it's responsible for. I'll see you.